I'm Marnie Schmidt, and I'm a real believer in operational excellence and quality. My mission is to help people like you build quality systems that improve both your product and your customers' overall experience, so you'll be a believer too. In this series, I'm breaking down ISO 9001 element by element, and we are rounding out the bases. We are nearly near the end. This is perhaps my favorite. I've been really looking forward to this section. I can't wait to get into it. But in each video, I give you one good reason to trust me. I have been doing internal audits for decades. I have audited every kind of organization you can imagine, both as an employee, as an owner, as a consultant, as a second-party auditor to my suppliers. I've worked all the way through the supply chain. I'm certified quality auditor with the American Society for Quality, and oh, there's just so much to talk about. Let's just get into it. I love internal audits. I don't like the word, I don't like the reputation, but if you actually do it and do it well, audits have made me the most awesome quality professional I could have possibly been. It's all through self-evaluation. I think everybody gets better. I don't think anybody can do anything without self-evaluation of some sort. Just like we've been talking about your quality system and measuring it, internal audits are just one of the greatest ways to really, really get to know your quality system and see where it's serving you well and where it's not serving you so well. So internal audits are an integral part of the quality management system and a very key component of ISO 9001. Also, in order to be registered to ISO 9001 and be compliant, from an outside standpoint, you have a third party that comes in and performs audits on you. So those are called external audits. Well, these internal audits are the chance for you to practice that and get ready to be scrutinized by someone from the outside. But also, you want to build an army internally, because this particular activity it's team building. It can be. It can also not be so much, so it's really important that we understand this requirement and really embrace it. That's one of the reasons that I embarked upon doing this series, is these requirements mean so much to me. They're just so good for running a business if you understand them and apply them properly. So let's jump right into 9.2 internal audits. 9.2.1, the organization shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the quality management system, A, conforms to, number one, the organization's own requirements for its quality management system, and two, the requirements of this international standard. So let's just stop right there. So we have to conduct audits, internal audits at planned intervals. So we have to figure out what that plan is. Companies have a very varied approaches to this and methodologies and theories about how they should do it. My own self, I've done it in lots of different ways. I've set it up so that I do it at the same rhythm as the outside third-party auditor team would approach it. I've done it at a much more frequency. I've done it in big pieces. I've tried to do like an internal audit to the entire ISO 9001 standard. I don't like that. Lots of other people do it that way. I think it's too cumbersome. I think that you get overwhelmed. I think you get weary, and by the end you could just kind of peter out and don't necessarily do the real digging and like really, really scrutinizing yourself and challenging yourself. So I really prefer to break it up. And I broke this video series up into sections that it's exactly the way I explain the requirements to you section by section is how I would audit this as well. When I first start implementing an ISO 9001 compliant management system from scratch, I do much more frequent audits, and then I learn my way through it. Now, as the results start to get better, I start to make those things less frequent. I'll audit something maybe once every 6 months rather than maybe once a quarter. It just depends. When a management system is new and young, it needs more surveillance, it needs more attention, it needs to be looked at more frequently. So we have to have planned intervals, and we have to make sure that we're auditing ourselves against our own requirements as well as the ISO 9001 requirements. So what does that mean? So first and foremost, it means that we have to ask ourselves if we're meeting every requirement in this ISO 9001 set of standards, the international standard. We have to ask ourselves, and we do have to audit our internal audit system, by the way, in case anybody's ever missed that one. You do have to have an internal audit of your internal audits. And you'll be reporting on your performance of your internal audits as well. But also, what other requirements are they talking about? What of our own requirements are we talking about? Well, it would be, in addition to the things that we have implemented because the ISO standard says that we have to do it, it would be all the other things too, like our processes. Remember, we identified our processes. We should have audits around that. And we can do that any way we want. We can put them all on their own little mini audit event where we just take one process and maybe it goes through any associated work instructions or checklists or standard operating procedures or training materials. It might encompass going and pulling all that together and saying, I'm going to have a look at this. We said we were going to do this particular thing. Let me go and verify that we did that. That would be an internal audit event around a particular process or about our own requirements. We can also combine our processes with the stuff that's in this international standard. I'm working with a client right now that did exactly that. So they have the management processes, which are the kinds of things that are in the ISO standard toward the beginning. The stuff about like leadership, they do an audit of that. The stuff about context of the organization and risks and opportunities, they do an audit around that. And then when they get to provision of products and services, they roll their processes and do audits on each individual process. So it's kind of a combination thing, which is really the best idea, is to do it on a process basis and make sure that you're pulling in all of the things so that you're catching all the requirements of your management system as well as the requirements inside ISO 9001. And then the other thing is we have to check that we conform to those requirements and that they are effectively implemented and maintained. So let's talk about internal audit forms. We're going to talk about the schedule in a minute, but just those two things, that it conforms to the requirements and that it's effectively implemented and maintained. So I like to start with a very, very generic set of questions whenever I do an internal audit. Whatever the requirement is, if it's something that's coming from the ISO 9001 standard, or if it's something that is a process flow for me with procedures or work instructions along with it, I like the questions I need to make sure in that internal audit activity, I ask myself, does it conform? So I say, first of all, where did I see this described? How is this identified in my quality management system? Is it in a quality manual? Is it a work instruction? Is it an SOP? Whatever it is, I like to identify where, because when I look at this again, I want to make sure that I understand exactly what was I looking at, what was I thinking of. So where was it identified is the first question. The second question I ask is, what evidence did I observe as an auditor? So where it said what we were supposed to do over here, so I got that, and I wrote, and I have a record, yeah, this is what I was looking at. Then this is what I observed with my own two eyes to show that we were conforming with that requirement and doing the thing that we wanted to do. And then the third question is, how's it working for me? So then that's the effectiveness, that it's effectively implemented and maintained. That's the third question. So where is it defined? What evidence did I look at to show that we were doing the thing, and how's it working for me? Now, that's three simple questions, and I can make an internal audit process that is very, very simple and straightforward. Everything that I want to evaluate, I ask myself those three questions, and I'm good to go, because I'm asking all the right things. Where is it? Am I conforming to it? And how's it working for me? Let's don't forget, the how's it working for me? It's the effectively maintained and implemented is so important, because you can have a system that's really well documented and you can follow it to the letter of the law every single day of your life, but it might not be a good system. So you need to ask yourself, it might be well documented, it might be consistent, but it's not yielding a good result. So you want to ask yourself that effectiveness question as well. Moving on, it tells us more detail about this. The organization shall, A, plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning requirements, and reporting, which shall take into consideration the importance of the processes concerned, changes affecting the organization, and the results of previous audits. That is probably the longest sentence in the entire standard, and there's so much stuff in there, so we are going to just parse this out just a couple of words at a time. The organization shall, okay, I know I gotta do it. So what do I gotta do? I have to plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that I have to have a plan. I have to establish it, meaning I need to probably write it down or make a checklist or make a process flow or something. I have to implement, meaning I gotta do the thing, and then I have to maintain it over time. An audit program, that includes, so now, okay, I've got my plan, I've got it implemented, I'm gonna maintain it over time, and what does it have to include? It has to include frequency of audits, so I have to know what I'm auditing and at what frequency, and maybe everything that I'm auditing doesn't have the same frequency. Maybe one thing, maybe context of the organization, for example, I might do that only once a year because I don't need to keep looking at that every 5 minutes, you know? And then maybe though corrective action or non-conforming product, I might look at that every quarter because it's more important and more impactful and more dynamic also, more volatile, and could be changing more than context of the organization isn't gonna change every time I turn around. So we've got the frequency we gotta define for everything that we're gonna audit. We gotta figure out how frequently we're gonna do that. The method, meaning how are we gonna audit? What does an audit look like? How are we gonna do all of that? We have to define all of it. The responsibilities, that means who is gonna do it, who's gonna maintain the program, who's gonna do the audits, and who is going to be the auditee. Planning requirements and reporting. So how are these things planned and how are they gonna be reported? So I've gotta figure out, am I gonna use a calendar? Am I gonna plan it for people, or am I just gonna assign the requirement to someone to be the auditor and it's up to them to plan it? We have to figure all of that stuff out. And how is it gonna be reported? I need to have some sort of an audit report. What am I expecting from an audit event? What kind of output should it have? And then it says, for all of those things, which shall take into consideration the importance of the process concerned, changes affecting the organization, and the results of previous audits. So that's 3 completely different things. So we talked about the frequency at the beginning. We said we're gonna do it at this frequency. But then it says, we shall take into consideration the importance of the process. So the critical processes might be more frequently, or they might be dug into more deeply, or they might be audited by more than one person, or whatever it is. The importance of the process needs to be considered. Changes affecting the organization. I like to build in, kind of jumping forward to nonconformance or corrective actions based on nonconformities. I like to build in, whenever I make a correction or take a corrective action, I like to build in an audit to it to make sure that that correction stuck. Also with changes, I like to build in internal audit events. They're quick and they're just like really quick and dirty. But if you make a change, in managing that change, I like to say, this was the change, I described the change, I communicated the change, everybody's aware of it, I changed the procedure, for example, I changed the workflow, whatever it was. But then I like to add an audit event just to make sure that that change stuck. And then maybe I put another audit event, maybe 6 months out, to make sure forever that a change really sticks. If we marry your change management with internal audits, and again, we're going to talk more about this as we move forward, audits don't all have to be the same exact type of activity. Some of them can be very paperwork centric, and some of them can be very activity centric, and some of them can be long and robust and high level and looking from an overall system standpoint, or they can be very, very specific, where just like, go out there, check this checklist and see if that new person is following that checklist the way we said. Or go out and see, we said we were gonna do these work orders differently, let's go like pick 10 work orders and make sure that that thing was done differently. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and you can set your audit program up to check all those things for you. That's how you're gonna go and find out where you have additional risk, because maybe a change is not making it, or you're not following a procedure, or you're not following a process flow the way you intended. So this is what internal audits are supposed to do for us. We're supposed to get value from them, not just do them to do them. So if we take into account the process, the importance of the process concerned, changes to the organization, and results of previous audits. So the expectation is on that, if a previous audit result is very, very good, you can potentially push the next frequency out a little bit. If the results were not very good, you would want to audit more frequently. You wouldn't want to do an audit and say, well, I set this up for once a year and I went in and I found a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of non-conformances, we're not doing anything right, and say, okay, see you again next year. You would want to take those audit results into account when you schedule the next one. Okay, that was a big sentence with a lot of requirements, and that's all in one. And then the next item you're following along with me, B, is like little tiny, little bitty sentence. We have to define the audit criteria and scope for each audit. So that is where we're going to start making this list. What is the audit criteria and the scope? And like I said, for 9001 requirements, my audit criteria and scope is broken out just the way this video series has been broken out. So I like to do it in sections. I might do all of like 9.2, I do all of 9.2 together. But in element 8, there's a lot of things that I break out, and I've even got that one little guide for change. I do that one all by itself. So the audit criteria and scope for each audit. I also like to have a secondary layer. This is just my preference, you don't have to, but I like to have a very, very quick audit where maybe it's just my work instructions. And also I keep my work instructions to a minimum. I told you, I've been saying that, keep your documentation to a minimum, but my work instructions are the kinds of things that I would pull out immediately when I bring onboard a new employee or bring someone new into a group that's been with the company but is new to my group. I would go through those work instructions, and that would be the training materials. In addition to that, for an internal audit, I might add audit events on just the work instructions. So that's very easy. I got one work instruction, I go out and watch people do it and say, that's my audit. It's not going back to the ISO standard, it's not any of that. It's just a really simple way of just going out and having a look. And so that makes it easy to perform audit. Also, I like to use internal audits for new employees. New associates, I've just given them a work instruction, I've trained them to that work instruction. I'm gonna give myself a little audit event and say, let me go check in with them in 2 weeks, and I'll take the work instruction, just observe. So this can also be how they demonstrate competence. Remember that from earlier, the section earlier on awareness and competence? You can use internal audits to help you with that. So you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone if you set your system up to use these tools and leverage them and not just go through the motions to get credit for having done it. So this audit criteria and scope for each audit. So you're gonna have a master list of all the different types of audits you're gonna do, all the different scope and criteria. You're gonna do each of the elements, and you're gonna do each of your work instructions or process flows or some hybrid combination of the 2. And then you're gonna move on to selecting auditors. We have to select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and the impartiality of the audit process. So then these are the items, the list of items that I need to audit. Now I have to figure out an auditor that is gonna be impartial and objective. So how do I do that? I need to give that some real thought when I'm designing my audit process. I need to make sure that I have people knowledgeable in the different areas, but not involved in the areas. You can't audit your own work and still be objective. So we have to put together an audit team of individuals that's going to be impartial and objective. We have to identify and train them also. And they have to be familiar with the requirements if they're auditing some of the things in the ISO standard, and they also have to be familiar with the requirements of the organization if they're going to be auditing things that are within the organization. Item D is we have to ensure that the results of the audits are reported to relevant management. So built into our audit system is the requirement of I need you to make an audit report when you do an audit, and then I need some way to compile that information and report it to management, whatever the findings are. And next is I have to take appropriate corrective and corrective actions without undue delay. So that one is kind of hard to nail down, like what does an undue delay mean? But that's part of the beauty of the standard is that it doesn't tell you so much detail. It's not terribly prescriptive, but it's without undue delay. You can't just have findings or non-conformances, whatever you want to call them. You'll notice that they don't have that defined. There's no minor or major or any of that stuff defined here. That's up to you as an organization to figure out. But we do have to make sure that we take appropriate correction and corrective action based on things if we find nonconformities or deviations from what we had planned as part of the system. And finally, we have to retain documented information as evidence of the implementation of the audit program and the audit results. So yes, this will be a required document. We got to have all the records need to be reported in, they need to be collected, and they need to be reported into management. And the note here says see ISO9001 for guidance. Go to ISO.org and get yourself a copy of that. It is helpful. It's really, really helpful. Now I just want to kind of give you my take on how I like to design an audit program. So like I've talked to you about that before. I like the design of a system that starts with this is my context of my organization. Here's my interested parties. Here are their needs. These are the processes that I'm going to use to achieve those objectives. So I'm gonna have an objective for each. So I've got my context, I've planned my business, I have a strategic plan, I've identified my risks and opportunities. I've got processes of management processes like the leadership, roles and responsibilities, management review, internal audits, corrective action. I have processes for all of those things. And then I have how to make a widget. I have a process for that. And then how to package the widget. I have a process for that. And then how to label the widget. I might have a process for that. So all of that makes up my process from input to output. And then I need to then figure out how I'm going to audit that thing. And like I said, if you have the process flows that show the interaction of all of your processes, so you've got a big old process map that shows process to process to process to process and how it moves through your business, then you can go another layer and for each individual process, have that described, and then maybe another layer that goes into a work instruction or a standard operating procedure or a checklist. If you have that kind of structure so that you can drill down through, you can set up your internal audit criteria to be exactly that. I'm going to audit the big processes at the top, and then I'm going to have a different type of audit in the middle, and then just the little work instruction or checklist, I'm going to have quick and dirty audits of that. I like to set it up that way, just have that list, have a calendar, January through December, and figure out for each item, when is that going to be audited? And then I figure out who is going to do the auditing for each of those things, making sure that they don't have any sort of conflict with the area that they're going to be auditing, that they know enough about it to be an effective auditor, and that they'll be objective. I make sure that I have them trained, and perhaps I want them to eventually be able to audit a different area. I might pair them up with someone, so I might do audit teams, especially when I'm new and this process is just kind of being developed. Also, when you set it up that way, you've got these little audits where it's like, just go out and follow this checklist and make sure somebody did the thing according to the checklist. That's a great way for an entry-level auditor to get started, so they're not diving into ISO 9001 and all of this words and all of this stuff and all these requirements. You can give them something simple that's just like, this is our little document, it's our little work instruction, just go follow, watch somebody do it and see what happens and see if they followed it. That's an easy assignment, and then you can go, okay, let's take that to a process flow where the process flow says, this process includes this work instruction and 2 checklists. Let's just follow that whole process flow and see if we did all those things, and then check the checklist and the work instruction. So then it's building some confidence, and they're learning more about that process. And then after some time, either being paired as an apprentice or however many practice audits they're going to do, then maybe pair them with an experienced auditor to try to do the high level, the stuff that starts including things from the standard. That's how I like to set my system up. It makes it more manageable. It helps me have a pipeline of internal auditors so that they're constantly learning and I am improving their skills. And you can certainly have some people go for outside training for internal auditing. That is a great idea. I mean, and even refresher auditing, because sometimes the standards are changed, but even just getting in a room with other people that are doing internal auditing is just a really good thing. It's a good professional development activity to undertake. So with all of that, that's the structure. I like to use Outlook. And the way I do that is now I know what I want to do. I know what I want to audit. I know who I want to audit. I got the scope and criteria. And like I said, I might have a very, very generic, easy form that says, where was it described in the quality system? What evidence did you observe to see that we followed whatever was described? And then how's it working for me? And I might pop that into an appointment. And I can do this for the entire year. I can have all the way January through December, everything that needs audited to the auditor. I can send them a meeting request and say, in January, this needs to get going, and here's an audit form. It's making it so much easier, so they're like, oh, okay, I know that I've got to get that done. And maybe you describe in your system, which I typically do, I'll send this out and you have to, within the month that it is assigned, you have to schedule it yourself. So the auditor's like, oh, okay, I've got to audit this particular thing. What am I auditing again? Oh, I'm auditing calibration. Okay, well, I got to figure out who is that. And I might even have on the meeting request, if I know, I might tell them, you got to get with Joe, and you and Joe got to do this internal audit. So now they've got everything they need. They've got an audit form, they've got a schedule, they know what they're going to be auditing, and all they have to do is put the time together. Now, when that audit happens, I make this on a special calendar. When the audit happens, the auditor can put their audit form, they just fill it out, it stays with the appointment. They can put attachments if they looked at evidence observed. They can put it all there and the calendar stays live. I can manipulate the audit events as finished, making sure that things are on time, because eventually I'm going to have to go report on the overall performance of the audit system, right? So I'll have it all right there for myself. I've got the records, I know when things happen, I can schedule another one, and I can even include a copy of the last audit results, which is also helpful. So that's the way I do it. You can do it however you like, because really only the requirements that we talked about are there, but that's the kind of stuff that this is how I would do it. I've found it to be very, very successful over time, very sustainable, and very informative. So then the best part is after all of that, you get it done and then you report it into management review, because by doing this, you've got to create that sense of teamwork and that everybody's got to be excited about having audits come up. And also, one last tip, you can leverage this internal audit business. You can give it a different name if audit is an upsetting word. It's a trigger for a lot of people, but that's not as important. Once your system gets more mature, it's not really gonna be a big deal. But one thing that you can do is you can give a clue, let this rumor circulate within your organization. Internal audits are a great way to bubble up something that is really bothering you and you think needs improved. So you can just sort of reveal yourself or expose your department if it's something that you really think needs to be improved. People can use internal audits to their advantage. They can get that item known. They can just tell them, be honest in an internal audit, because it'll get you some help. And if your organization actually responds that way, people will be less resistant to being audited. They're like, oh, this is a good opportunity, because once it gets in, it gets known that this particular thing needs help. The auditors should always be creating a safe place so that we are interested in that feedback and we want to improve it, and management needs to be committed to improving whenever there are nonconformances found. There's no words to stress how important it is that nonconformances be treated as a positive experience and an opportunity to improve, and never, never punitive, and certainly not with internal audits. Anything an internal audit result reveals should never be used for punitive or shame or anything negative at all, or I'll tell you, it's gonna be a slog. Your internal audit system is just gonna be a pain and you're gonna hate it. So make it positive. It can be a lot of fun, and I mean, you need to leverage it, because this particular activity is powerful. It is seismic how much it can improve your business. So next, we're going to be moving right into management review. So we are really, really just about finished up with this series. So I hope you enjoyed 9.2 internal audits. I want you to get out there, embrace it, and be a cheerleader, get everybody excited about it. And next, we'll be reporting some of those results into management review and talking about how is the system working for us. But until then, keep improving.